All right, Chris, we're here this week again getting to chat about Jacob, who, as we talked a little bit about beforehand, is one of my more challenging characters to talk about. So it'll be probably all the better to start with you this time and just get some of your thoughts. But there's a good amount, I think, to chat about, and I think we've both got some things that we want to chat about, and some things that we want to chat about with Jacob that weren't in this devotion, but we'll try and keep it limited to this devotion. So, as you were reading, what were you thinking and reflecting on, Chris?
Yeah, a lot of stuff. It's it's interesting that you would say that. I'm grateful. Um, I'm grateful for your honesty. I kind of resonate with Jacob to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
and I think he's totally intriguing. Um, and I think if I had an honesty moment here with this plan, it's that it's only slightly frustrating for me to be dropped off at the curb of, now he lives with Laban. There's so much of his story that follows where this plan dropped us off.
Right.
But so this plan was oriented around the concept of identity. And like I was saying, we got dropped off kind of not even in the middle of the story. It's kind of a third of the way in, maybe, of his life.
Right. Right.
This idea of identity is a thread throughout his entire life. And you would see, like, we stopped somewhere around Genesis 28, 29. By the time we get to, it's Genesis 32 when God wrestles with him and then names him Israel.
Right.
Right. So even another identity thread that comes a few chapters later. But where I resonate is I love the idea, and God does this constantly. All these characters in the Bible who are, let's just say, have a messy past,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
And maybe they aren't obedient, or they're kind of shifty and shady in some respects.
Right.
And Jacob is totally that, from the beginning,
Right.
right?
Right.
And some of the things that stand out are, the parts of his identity that he owned, even though it really was like he stole it, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
the whole game with taking Esau's blessing, and if you notice, he even had, like, in that story, he had to lie to Isaac 3 times,
Yeah. Right.
right? So, and his mom is like in the other room around the corner going like, just go get it, so she's encouraging it, right?
Right.
It's just tricky, like, and we're supposed to be like, well, but this is good because it ends up good. Well, I think it shows us more about God than it shows us about Jacob or even ourselves.
That's where that's where I think you kind of got me thinking when we were talking earlier, and and I mean, I'm aware of that, right? Well, I guess one of the things I love about talking about things is things that I'm aware of that I've kind of stopped thinking about. Sometimes, people can point them out to me, and I can become re-aware of the
Mm-hmm.
significance of that thing. And so, you know, I'm aware that whenever we read the Bible, we're really learning about God, right? Like the
Yeah,
story of
right.
Jacob is the story about God, and right, and the
Yeah.
coming of Christ, and it's not about Jacob so much. But it's easy to get caught up in that when you read the stories. And so to be talking to you and be like, okay, look at what this says about God, to choose somebody like Jacob to be such an important figure and such
Right.
a backbone of this, but not just to be this figure. He also, he it comes later in the book, so we don't want to spend. But he changes the identity of him, right? Or at least changes the name of him.
Well, so it's interesting too. Think about it. Um, it took um, the author of this plan was talking about identity before we even get to the part where God speaks over Jacob a
Right,
new identity,
right,
right? But God is speaking in the middle of this plan. He's speaking in the middle of these verses already when he's telling Jacob essentially the same things that he told Abraham,
mm-hmm,
right? Like, he tells Abraham, your descendants are going to be more numerous than the stars. And then later he comes to Jacob and said, it's going to be, your descendants are going to be more numerous than the grains of sand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's essentially the same conversation. Your
Yep.
descendants are going to be more numerous than you can count. And in Jacob's case, he says they're going to be spread all over the earth.
Right. That's
And
interesting.
right, and you look now, I mean, that's true.
Right.
Right? How many Jews are on the earth? Don't really know, and they're all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, I mean, I'm sure you could figure out kind of how many there are, but it's an incredible number of people, born from this nation, right?
Right.
Um, and one of the things I thought was interesting is toward the end of this plan, the author was talking about we're witnessing God shape Jacob's character.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, right. So he goes from this like sort of rough cut, thieving, jealous of his brother, um, kind of miscreant in a way, trickster.
Mm-hmm.
He's Loki, right?
Right.
In like
Right.
Marvel parlance, he's Loki. Um, but, and we mentioned this earlier, but like one of maybe the first time that he actually obeyed his parents is when his mom says, well, okay, your brother wants to kill you now, so go live with your Uncle Laban,
Yeah.
right? And he does. So, it's interesting to me where that pivotal, like he was in such a critical spot right there. You can stay here and, be threatened, uh, and like threatened probably really seriously, not just like don't know,
Right.
but
Right.
like Esau probably would do it
Right.
right then. So you could stay here under that threat, or you can go live with Laban.
Yeah.
And he does. He packs up and he leaves.
Right.
And on his way, right, he has that first encounter with God,
Right.
right? And there's something, I don't know what this is, and I don't want to expound, but there's something about Jacob and the night seasons,
Mm.
right? Because he goes to sleep and he encounters God.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, he goes to sleep and he encounters God. It's like there's something going on with Jacob in the night seasons, and that's probably a whole nother study another time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me how it was like those moments that started to shape who he would become. And if you fast forward, not just into chapter 32 where he wrestles with the angel or wrestles with God and is touched on the hip and he's blessed now and all that stuff, but even beyond that, we're going to go into the Joseph story.
Right.
Jacob looms large in the Joseph story.
Yeah. I was thinking
Right.
about that.
Right. So he's Joseph's dad, but he's the dad to all of the 12 brothers.
Right.
Right. And he sends them, and look at that. He sends them ultimately repentantly to Joseph.
Right.
With the whole family's hat in their hand.
Right.
Right. So somewhere Jacob was raw and absolutely, a pain in the neck, and he grows up to be like this fantastic patriarch.
Well, I think about that. I think about that because what was I talking about recently? I forget what I was thinking about exactly, but we were just talking a little bit about how God equips the called, right? He doesn't call the equipped.
Right.
Right. So when God looks to use somebody, right, in general, he's not taking somebody who's already perfect at that thing. He's usually calling somebody to do something, and throughout the process of needing to do that, he'll prepare them and equip them to do that.
Right.
Right. And he does this. I mean, this is just story after story throughout the New Testament, throughout the Old Testament, maybe more specifically, but also in the New Testament, where he takes somebody and you look at what that person has to do and you say, that person cannot do that. Right. He cannot do, or she cannot do what they're being asked to do.
Mm-hmm.
And we're right in making that judgment. But with God, they can. Right.
It's so interesting how you just made me think of something else. But look how, like, Jacob was, you could call him prideful.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think so.
I mean, I think, yeah, at the beginning of his,
Yep.
like as a young man, he's prideful.
Right.
Um, you could say the same thing about Esau to an extent too.
Right. Right.
But I look at, so you just talk about God equips the called, which basically to me was another way of saying like God makes of us what he intends,
Right.
not what we think we can do. And it goes all the way back to Adam, right? Because it got me thinking about like we're just lumps of clay
Yeah.
and God forms us
Yeah.
and continually forms us. Like he
Right.
doesn't leave us alone, he continually forms us.
Right.
Well, Adam was literally lump of clay,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Formed by God and breathed into by the breath of God. So yeah, I mean that's pretty um, foundational equipping, if you want to call it equipping.
Yeah.
But we all start as some kind of lump of clay, and I would take the story of Jacob on reflection and be like, well, who are we to even be prideful when really I was just a lump of clay?
Well, that's where I want to spend just a little time here before before we end up
Yeah.
having to wrap. It's just, I mean, these conversations I think become the best and the most worthwhile, right? When you start talking about what is God kind of working in me, and what is God kind of calling me to do, and it becomes a little more of a personal thing, and super beneficial to kind of talk about what God is doing, right? But then to start reflecting and saying, okay, so what does that mean? What is God saying to me in my life, and how do I kind of help you, Chris, right?
Mm-hmm.
Reflect on that in your life. And it's just, man, it is. Those are two interesting points, right? The pride, and the idea that to look at any of the things that are going on at Webster Gardens or in my family or anything like that, friends, neighborhood, that God needs me. Which sometimes, man, I go from full of myself to thinking I can't do anything, right? And it's beautiful because God meets me in both places, right? He
Right.
looks at me and he says, "Oh, you're full of yourself. You think that I need you in order to do that thing? It's insane, right? To think that God needs me, right?
Yeah.
But to also think that I can't do anything is equally as insane. Like, I mean, I'm aware of how powerful God is. I'm aware of how smart God is. I'm aware of, you know, uh, the fact that He's not wrong. So if He calls me to do something, He's correct in calling me to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, He chooses to use me in that role. Um, but but that's a little bit where this Jacob story I think is hitting me right now. Is as I look at this character who just seems like a very annoying, disrespectful, unloving character who lies to his father, steals from his brother, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
And runs away.
and runs away, and then God just shows us like, hey, I use Jacob, right? And it's not about the person, right? His God's goal, right, is to bless all peoples, right? To bring Jesus
Yeah.
Christ and to bless the whole world, right? To not even just bless the Jewish people, to not just bless descendants of Abraham, to bless the whole world, right, through Jesus Christ. He doesn't need good people to do that. He can work through anybody who he wants to
Right.
accomplish his will, right? But he does also um, work, right, to forgive, to save, and to empower people,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's an important reflection for me, thinking about myself and thinking about the people who I get tempted to judge. So I'm going to leave it at that with me. We got about a minute left. You got a final thought on your end?
Yeah. So I'm juggling two thoughts here, but I'm going to go with this one.
Go with both of them. Hit
Maybe
it
I'll
back.
hit both of them. We'll see. Um, yeah, let's see if we can fold them together. Um, so one of the things that was really interesting toward the end of the week um, was the idea of how sin shows itself, most enticing or whatever when we're at our weakest moment. And so we're talking about the trading Esau trading the birthright for a bowl of soup
That was a
because
good point.
right because he's hungry right then. And so we have this immediate need, and it might be a real need even, but we have this immediate need, and we'll trade my kingdom for a horse
Yep.
kind of mentality.
Oh my goodness,
Um,
I could have spent all 15
but
minutes on this passage.
I know, right? And it was weird because it, working with that as I got in the car and drove home earlier today. I was thinking about all the ways that God is meeting our family's needs and the needs of people I know, like real immediately and tangibly right now. I'm seeing this happen. And I actually was driving home, and it's only a 7-minute drive for me.
Hmm.
So, I got to think fast if I'm going to think on the way home. And I was thinking, like, God, you are moving so powerfully in so many ways that I can see right now. What am I even actually doing? Like, normally I would be trying to strain and work hard to do something. And I'm seeing
Oh,
God meet things so powerfully right now
right.
is the best way I can say it. That I'm like I am totally that speck of dust right now.
And you can take no credit.
There's nothing I could do,
Yeah,
right? Yeah, and if I can rub two nickels together, it's because He gave me a nickel,
dude, that is. I
right?
am with you. Yeah.
So yeah, it just got me thinking about, okay, so where have I traded my kingdom, quote my kingdom, for a horse? Where have I sold something so cheaply for a pet sin? Or where have I given away something meaningful for something trivial?
Man. Okay, well, I know what you and I are going to talk about when we
That's
drive
right.
home. All right, so we've got our thing. We're at 16 minutes here, so we're going to wrap. Thanks, Chris, for the conversation, man.